I thought this was pretty boring and uninspired. When it comes to like dance hall and house pop and EDM club jams, I'm usually more lax towards how I enjoy it because the appeal of it is just to, get you moving and, get people dancing. However, despite the production being, at times flashy and glittery, there's no genuine charisma or energy emanating from really anything on here for me. Kyle's vocals aren't bad, but they kind of fall aloof, and it doesn't help that there are not many memorable melodies or deliveries or grooves of any kind. Everything is so by the numbers and predictable that I didn't really like a single song on here. I've heard the sound done way better. It's just not for me. I tried to get into this album since I like some of her previous stuff, but this album is it's too commercial for me. It's pretty standard, somewhat mopey electropop with flavors of disco and piano balladry here and there, but everything from the basic production to the vocal delivery just never gelled with me. Songs like to Survive and Cool to Cry and New Moon have decent foundations, but the execution is just so generic. It has no personality of its own, which is disappointing because I do think she is a very talented artist, but every song on here just sounds like a dime a dozen pop track you would hear on the radio station for like a month, and I'm just not really into that sound. It's a pretty foresty emo folk album that's not anything new for Pinegrove, but considering that this is their 5th album and I can still be amused and sometimes immersed in their dreamy, woodsy, alt-country, indie rock sound is a pretty good sign. There's a lot of lyrical depth here as well, and the higher-end folksy/emo vocal delivery from Evan Hall is able to give off this sense of warmth and comfort. It's like I am sitting by a campfire in a wet forest listening to him sing about his life and his virtues. Songs like Swimming, Habitat, and Let are my personal highlights, although I can understand why people say it is a bit generic, and that to me is because nothing on the album really blows you away in terms of its artistry, and a lot of songs can bleed into each other because there are just not that many distinguishing characteristics or qualities about the music. Regardless, I thought it was nice to put on in the background and just let it ease my mind with how easygoing it is, while also providing some emotionally resonating moments here and there to kind of keep me interested. Yeah, I dig it. This is a really spacious and hypnotic EP. The futuristic house sound fused with bits of breakbeat and techno does wonders, as there's a lot of depth and detail to the noise. You got breathy vocal samples, glowing keys and synths, and subtle micro progressions in how the sound sways and swerves, which is able to convey this spiritual tech luminescence where I can close my eyes and just let go. I really dug 4 out of the 5 songs, the odd one out being the song Relay. I think the wisping effects are a bit disorienting in a non-flattering way, but songs like Taurus, Memory Screen/Fantasy, and Leave Here are great, and Sky River is my personal favorite. I think the featured vocalist gives a fittingly spectral performance to fit the song's tribally mystic aesthetic. Overall, it's a great EP. I'm a pretty big fan of Katie's. Her last album really won me over with how interestingly textured it was and how withered and frail yet innocent her vocal delivery was. Forever Music continues that sound and expands on it with her somewhat amelodic sensibilities, paired with just how much is going on in the background in terms of the amount of layers of effects and electronic washes. It's as engaging a sound as ever, but the driving force behind it is Katie's storytelling and lyricism, which is very personal, somewhat romantic, and very cynical as she sings about numerous factors of crippling depression like loneliness, external depravity, and love laced with death. Every time Katie brings up her feelings of love and romance, it's quickly juxtaposed by, again, self-realizing nihilism and death, but in a way to highlight just how much this other person means to her. Every track brings a new train of thought out into the open, so it's a lot to take in and unravel, not only in the sense that there are a lot of themes and emotions to unpack, but some of the songs go this extra mile, reaching these dazzling climaxes with over-the-top eccentric flourishes where you are hit with huge waves of overwhelming euphoric emotion, like on the songs Real Love, Happy Girl, and the title track. I personally love this album a lot. I barely have any complaints with it. I highly recommend it. Anais' new album is solid. She gives some great vocal performances across the album, most notably on the songs On Your Way, which is a tearful tribute song to a deceased friend of hers, and Little Big Girl, where she shows how kind of surreal it is to understand as a child who is growing up fast just how much responsibility you're going to bear in the future, and even when you're an adult you still can't fully, grasp just how suddenly things change. Now You Know is my favorite song on here, which details this like rabbit hole of her thinking, linking death to children, to romance, to sadness, to youth, to freedom. The vocal swooning she does in between verses is a pretty nice touch too. I think the instrumentals, being as soft served as they are, still have some twang and heart to them, very naturey feel, which I thoroughly appreciate. While not every song is as interesting as the next, there's still a pretty good amount of high points. I liked it overall, a few complaints, but nothing really major. When it comes to slowcore, a big draw about the genre for me is like the slow burn and how it builds not only to moments of catharsis, but also in how it presents its themes in a way that's worth drawing songs out, and this album really doesn't do it for me in that regard. It tries to blend a post-hardcore sound with their core approach to like emo slowcore, with some songs having these explosive segments of roaring riffs and screams, but those moments are few and far between and are not very fulfilling. The track listing quickly just turns into like a loop of slow chord progressions, which sound the same across the entire album, into some post-hardcore roars that just don't hit hard enough. The whispered vocal deliveries and lyrics are interesting and gives this album a feeling of like intimate emotion, but it's not given decent enough instrumental foundation for me to remain invested. Yeah, overall I wasn't that into it. Never heard of this group before, went in completely blind, and I was left intrigued but also kind of wanting more, primarily in the vocal department. I do like their lyrical and topical style. They're very meta when it comes to their songs. Like, for example, Sex Cult kind of frames these portions of the entertainment industry as being sex cults, and there are a lot of other tunes that follow suit and provide interesting commentary on other topics like consumerism and social norms. It also helps that they flirt around with sounds of psych pop, chamber music, and even drone here and there, presenting this like modern nostalgia. The aesthetic is unique for sure, but man, I wish there was more to the vocals because they are incredibly one note throughout the entire thing. Barely any shifts in range. It comes off as super stiff in some of the more animated tracks. The lack of an emphasis on vocal variety kind of reinforced the sensation I got that this was all for novelty. I really didn't like it on my second listen as much as I did on my first listen, and to me this album's kind of a one-way trip. Dove into this one head first with no prior knowledge of the group, and I was thoroughly surprised. They're an ethio jazz outfit, and on this album there are a lot of psychedelic embellishments on top of the conjunctions of Afrobeat, soul jazz, and funk that completely immersed me into its sound. Also helps that the arrangements are carried pretty well in due part to the great instrumental performances, particularly on the horns and woodwinds. Like, the flute on this album goes hard. The album as a whole has a pretty easygoing sound with some interesting progressions and layering to keep things interesting. It's quite a mellifluous experience, and though I don't think there are any songs that will knock your socks off, in my opinion, I think a lot of people won't object to how gripping it can be. I liked it a lot, and it's definitely worth checking out. Being that this is my first Josephine Foster album and the only thing I knew about her prior was that she was quite avant-garde, I came away enjoying a lot of the ideas she brought to the table. I thought they were extremely impressive in practice for the most part. The biggest appeal to me is how cosmic and psychedelic this album is, thanks to the shifting synth tones on Sparks Fly, woozy synthesizers on Gold Entwine, and the clashing synthesizers on the closing track. I'm a huge sucker for anything that sounds sci-fi, so it baffled me how she was able to merge her singer-songwriter folk sound with the sounds of an alien mothership, almost like she was abducted by a UFO and the aliens brought up the recording studio that she was in by accident. Vocally, she reigns mostly in her higher register, and that gives her plaintive performances a feeling of fleeting desperation, like on the song Guardian Angel, which is my favorite song. A couple of tracks do exist where she wasn't quite gripping me with her vocals or lyrics, and while I'm big on the cosmic sound, I wish the palette for it was a bit more expansive rather than just rehashing the same sounds. Would have made for a much more distinct experience than it already is, but overall, I thought it was pretty good. I saw some pretty good buzz about this album and I gave it a couple of whirls, and I gotta admit, this is pretty dope. I think the sound of like Afro-Caribbean Latin jazz is given a lot of amplification due to the massive drums, eccentric vocal performances, and numerous musical influences like psychedelia and punk that gives this album quite an edge. At times it can be really spiritual, it can be really up in your face, really sensual. What kind of holds it back for me is I think it could have been trimmed down a bit, as I felt like a couple of songs didn't bring much to the table and definitely prolonged the experience. But as a whole, it has a pretty ample amount of flavor to it and definitely worth checking out. I was pretty amped for this album because the numerous EPs she has dropped over the last couple of years were pretty enchanting pieces of avant-garde art pop and dream pop. I was eager to see just how Ghostly Kisses' sound would expand going forward, and she absolutely delivered on this album. It's so ethereal and phantasmic. Her breathy vocals and the gorgeous moments where they harmonize amongst one another are able to convey so much emotion and distress while being soothing to listen to, reassuring me that there is nothing to fear despite just how enveloping and swallowing the sound is. Side note, I also love how the album cover looks the way the album sounds. That's always a plus in my opinion. The instrumentals on this thing are so vast and bottomless in due part to how layered and dense the electronics are, and the big crescendos where the songs swell up and permeate through the soundscape are so revealing, like a light guiding me through the dark. My favorites include Carry Me, Blackbirds, and Don't Know. There's not really a song I could say I disliked or was disinterested in any way. I loved it. I thought it was awesome. Not gonna lie, I thought this was an album by Villagers, with an S, the Irish rock band, so when I was hearing how trippy and spacey and sonically expansive this album was, my illiterate dumbass was congratulating them for undergoing such a huge sonic shift and producing such an exciting end result. Then I noticed the lack of an S on my second listen, and I was like, oh, well, I'm fucking stupid. But it is nice to know that a clerical error on my part led me to listening to this majestic ass electronic album. The groupings of IDM, future house, and down-tempo are irresistibly alluring. There is so much depth and weight to the sound, not a single inch of the soundscape has been spared. The grooves and rhythms are so kinetic. I felt like I was visiting numerous planets and technological vistas with their own ecosystems, all while dancing. It reaches so many monolithic peaks. This album could very well be repurposed into a soundtrack for a VR space exploration game. I loved nearly every second of this album. I highly recommend it. I don't know what it is with me loving foreign chamber folk albums. Maybe I adore hearing a different language, maybe the lush instrumentation carries a unique essence about it, or maybe I just love the phonetics, but regardless, this album is beautiful. It's super well produced, it's highly emotional. Even if you don't understand the lyrics like me, you can hear the emotion resonating throughout every single song on here. Silvana ranges from being heartbroken to conflicted to being spiteful to being remorseful, all in very convincing fashion. Also helps that, again, it's so beautiful. The Baroque elements are so perfectly intertwined with every moving part, they will never not make you feel something. I personally loved it. Very little, if any, complaints. Highly recommend. It's my favorite of the week. That concludes this episode of last week's music. Here is a tier list of how much I enjoyed the albums I heard last week to help visualize my overall opinions. That being said, I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode's albums/albums you heard that I didn't mention. Leave a comment down below. Please like the video if you enjoyed it. Consider subscribing. And thank you so much for watching the video. I will see you guys next time.